Yes, hola, bon dia, Portugal. It's the Good Morning Portugal podcast with me, Carl Munson.
A million housewives every day pick up a tin of beans and say, beans means Heinz.
Yes, people of a certain age will remember that advertising campaign, I think from the 1970s, the last century, indeed. As well as talking about beans today, we have some vocabulary for you, beans related, namely...
Feijão, feijões, torrada, vento, peidar.
All will be revealed about those. Just a quick recap of the week, because this has been the first week of the new Good Morning Portugal podcast, which has replaced the Good Morning Portugal radio show, although there will be occasional radio shows as well. But we've switched to the focus of a daily 5-minute podcast. I hope you've been enjoying them. And if you aren't aware of them, and this is your first, where have you been? Please subscribe through our Patreon page, patreon.com, patreon.com/Carl Munson, CarlMunson. Anyway, on with a quick recap of the week. We started with an introductory podcast talking about the changes, but we also gave you a bit of vocab. We did all 7 days of the Portuguese week this week. Catch up with those on episodes 1 and 2. Well, we did their origins as well, actually, but then we disappeared down a can of worms that got well and truly opened to do with Portuguese coffee. They discovered that Portuguese coffee is a kind of trade association or guardian of the flavours and story and provenance of Portuguese coffee. And on their website, they have 15 kinds of coffee that you can enjoy. Shared that with people on the Pure Portugal Facebook group. And yes, that's when the can of worms opened, the can of coffee beans opened, I suppose. And we discovered that there are many more. I thought 15 was a lot. And we noted on the Facebook group that you very rarely see people drinking anything other than a cafe shot, where you would, let me just recap on that. If you want to order a coffee in Portugal, it would be queria café, faz favor. A really good and useful piece of vocabulary there. And most people do drink the shot, maybe with 1 or 2 sugars in, and off they go, nice and quick, and it can cost you as little as 50 cents. Paid 50 cents the other day in Leiria. After that, I discovered in Tomar, which was yesterday's podcast, Portuguese Place of Interest, Tomar, great place, and find out more about that on yesterday's episode 5 of the podcast, all about Tomar. But in Tomar, I discovered the Café Concha de Pardo. Yes, inevitably, that unbridled a level of British humour. Can't help that. That's where I was brought up. So I was heartily amused by Café Concha de Pardo, which we discover is coffee with ice cream, not unlike the Italian affogato, but it's the other way up. Why it's called Concha de Pardo remains a mystery. But interestingly, part of today's theme is baked beans, because that's what we covered on the Pure Portugal podcast this week, which I also host and produce, where we looked at baked beans and the origin of baked beans. So check out the Pure Portugal podcast for more about that. But that's given us our vocab today.
Feijão, feijões, torrada, vento, peidar.
And it starts fairly well with bean, and you really need to know what bean is, because not only will you encounter many kinds of bean in Portugal in tins, but also grown and dried in markets, feijão, and you'll also see villages, mostly villages I think, called feijão. Feijões, I think, is the plural. Let's hear that again.
Feijão, feijões.
So there you go, bean and beans, feijão and feijões, well worth knowing. And you're going to want to know what toast is, aren't you? Because it's traditional to have beans on toast. Now, toast is very interesting in Portugal as well, and that will be torrada.
Torrada.
And what's so beautiful about toast in Portugal is a lot of people, alongside their cafe in the morning, they will have torrada, which to me, and in the places I've seen it, is toast buttered on both sides. So the Brits, I think, will heartily approve of that, and heartily being a word used advisedly there in terms of cholesterol and so on, and health concerns with that. Now, this is where today's episode takes a turn for the worse, because when I was discussing with Mrs. Munson, who's on this adventure with me in Portugal, what should we talk about as our vocab today? We did beans, we did toast, and she said, well, you've got to do wind, of course, and there will be 2 kinds. There will be the meteorological kind, and there will be the kind that you probably won't hear on most language tuition services, should I say. So those would be...
Vento.
Vento, obviously, is the meteorological version of wind, and then, of course, there's the other kind of wind, which would be...
Peidar.
And that is the inevitable consequence, it would seem, of eating beans either of the Heinz bushes or your very own recipe. Take care. And something for next week, because it's already Saturday now, but something you might like to prepare for next Friday is boa fin de semana, which is have a nice weekend. Bon fin de semana. Bye for now. Até breve.